Silicon Valley powers the global economy, but it's an educated workforce that powers our innovation ecosystem. Today, it's facing new challenges as well as opportunities, driving diversity in our STEM pipelines, increasing the number of women in a more flexible workforce, building connections between historically black colleges and universities and Bay Area networks, understanding and responding to the Great Resignation with a new education, critical conversations on the connections between COVID-19 and children's mental health in our schools. These are the speakers, panels, and issues taking place now, and they happen here. The Silicon Valley Leadership Group Higher Learning Summit, presented by Blue Shield of California.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Gaucher, Vice President of Partner Success at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. On behalf of SVLG, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our 2021 Education and Workforce Summit, Higher Learning. Today's summit will feature top Biden administration officials and leaders from across education and business. They are here with us to consider how our leaders may best support preparing all Americans for 21st century jobs. The conversation today will provide insight into the challenges facing education and talent development. They will ask us to rethink our assumptions about inclusive design in order to make education and technology more accessible. Our contributors today will address the steps we can all take to support students' mental health during this pandemic. And they will speak to how Silicon Valley's business can work with our community colleges, CSUs, and UCs to open bottlenecks and graduate more students. I'm also very excited to hear the panel discussion led by CEO of the United Negro College Fund, Dr. Michael Lomax, and presidents from some of the top HBCUs. And now, we are honored to begin today's Higher Learning Summit with United States Assistant Secretary of Commerce from Economic Development, Alejandra Castillo. As head of the EDA, she is responsible for fulfilling the agency's mission of leading the federal government, the Federal Economic Development Agency, including overseeing the implementation of $3 billion in economic development funding appropriated as a part of President Biden's American Rescue Plan. Thank you for joining us, Secretary Castillo.
Hello, I'm Alejandra Castillo, and I'm honored to serve President Biden and our nation as U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Economic Development. I thank the Silicon Valley Leadership Group for inviting me to join you. The Biden-Harris administration is taking bold steps to address the inequities in our economy and provide relief to those who are struggling during the COVID pandemic. We are committed to a whole-of-government approach and to working with everyone to create a bright future for our nation and its workers. We are proud of the fact that the economy has gained an average of 442,000 jobs over the last 3 months, and that the unemployment rate has fallen to 4.6%, marking the lowest unemployment rate we've experienced since the pandemic began. We are proud of the bipartisan infrastructure law that the president recently signed, and which will create good-paying jobs all across the country by fixing our roads and bridges, replacing lead pipes, installing electric vehicle charging stations, and much, much more. And the U.S. House of Representatives voted to approve President Biden's Build Back Better bill, a giant step towards its passing an agenda that will create jobs, reduce costs, tackle the climate crisis, make our country more competitive, and rebuild the backbone of the country, the middle class. President Biden's Build Back Better agenda reflects a core belief that motivated him to run for president, that we owe working people in this country a fair shot, that we have to prepare them to compete, and that we owe them a level playing field on which to do so. The Build Back Better agenda is about giving everyone that chance. Three of the major components of the Build Back Better agenda are: first, climate, tackling the climate crisis by creating good-paying, clean energy jobs. Secondly, health, making healthcare more affordable. And third, family, making caring for your family more affordable. The Build Back Better agenda is about the things that really matter to people. Can I get a good job in my hometown? Is training available to me so that I can maximize my talents? Can I go to sleep with a little peace of mind? Can my kids get a good education and build an even better life for themselves? We can't put the promise of the middle class life within reach of every American if we can't compete around the world. And we can't compete around the world so long as we neglect the resilience and capacity of our infrastructure, the education and health of our workforce, and the most American idea of all, the opportunity for every single person to get a fair shot. Our work must start with developing a skilled 21st century workforce. In order to maintain our competitive edge, we need to make smart investments in our people. At the Department of Commerce, our Secretary, Gina Raimundo, spent a lot of time assessing what it is that made American businesses so competitive for decades and what we need to maintain in order to keep that competitive edge. Bottom line, without smart investments, we risk losing our competitive edge. As the Secretary has often said, if workers have the courage to take the risk in getting trained in a new career, then we need to provide high quality, affordable training programs that lead directly to a job. The President's Build Back agenda includes bold and long overdue investments in workers that will create profits for businesses large and small. It supports training and apprenticeship program that will prepare millions of American workers for high quality jobs of tomorrow. Our current workforce challenges aren't just about skills. We also need to prepare the next generation of workers and make it easier for parents to participate in the workforce. It's about giving all American workers an opportunity to participate in our economy in the first place. Under President Biden's American Rescue Plan Act, the Economic Development Administration, where I serve as Assistant Secretary, received an unprecedented $3 billion in supplemental funding. This funding is helping us to assist communities nationwide in their efforts to build back better by accelerating the economic recovery from the pandemic and building local economies that will be resilient to future economic shocks. With this funding, EDA will make transformative investments to strengthen communities and provide Americans with the skills they need to get good paying jobs available today. On July 22nd, Secretary Raimundo announced EDA's 6 American Rescue Plan funding opportunities. I'd like to talk to you about one of them in particular. Our Good Jobs Challenge is EDA's premier workforce development initiative that allocates $500 million towards industry-led workforce training programs to help get Americans, particularly women, people of color, and those in underserved communities, back to work in good-paying jobs. The Good Jobs Challenge is designed to help get Americans back to work by investing in developing and strengthening regional workforce training systems that support sectoral partnership, designing sectoral partnerships, and implementing sectoral partnerships that will lead to high-quality jobs. The goals of regional workforce training system is to create and support effective training programs that will connect the in-demand and emerging skills needs of employers with qualified workers and help workers find and keep quality jobs and advance themselves along their chosen career paths. This program is designed to get Americans back to work and increase wage growth, as well as develop demand-driven systems that will continue to support Americans in securing and retaining quality jobs. Successful applicants will include proactive employers' engagement and mobilization, as well as employer commitment to hire. It is imperative that economic and workforce developers work together to design a comprehensive strategy in workforce development for their regions, in particular with local labor, universities, community colleges, and employers. It is time to think about all of these pieces holistically and collaboratively, which is why we focus so much on the systems development building at EDA and really encourage that in doing so as you apply for the Good Jobs application. The Good Jobs Challenge application deadline is January 26, 2022. For more information, please visit eda.gov. Before I close, I'd like to note that the Economic Development Administration has many other programs available to support locally driven strategies designed to improve our communities, strengthen our workforce, and create new good jobs. At EDA, we understand that communities are at different points on their pandemic recovery, as well as their economic development journey. Some communities need help developing a plan, figuring out where to start their economic development efforts. Other communities need critical infrastructure supporting business expansion, while others may need help building ecosystems to translate innovation into jobs. Our investment priorities provide an overarching framework to ensure that our grants investment portfolio, ranging from planning to infrastructure construction, contributes to local efforts to build, improve, or better leverage economic assets that allow businesses to succeed and regional economies to prosper and become more resilient. Today, our top investment priority is equity, which speaks to our continued commitment to working closely with our nation's underserved populations and communities. Working with these populations and communities has been our mission since President Johnson signed the Public Works and Economic Development Act, which authorized the creation of EDA into law in 1965. I am committed to ensuring that our historic American Rescue Plan funding and all of EDA's programs are equitably distributed. To close, thank you for all that each of you do to ensuring a competitive 21st century workforce for our nation. I am grateful and I wish you a successful conference. Thank you.
The Silicon Valley Leadership Group Higher Learning Summit would like to take a moment to thank all of our important sponsors today. We'd like to thank our thought leader sponsor for the event, Blue Shield of California. We would also like to thank our innovator sponsors, Genentech and the San Francisco 49ers. We would like to thank our accelerator sponsors, IBM, KLA, and the Santa Clara County Office of Education. We would like to thank our incubator sponsors, Applied Materials, Microsoft, Stanford University, and University of Phoenix. We would like to thank our media sponsors, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Bay Area News Group, Mercury News. And we would also like to thank our amazing production partner and sponsor, Zoom. Thank you for your support.
Good morning. I'm David Palter, Senior Director of Higher Education and Workforce Development at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. The number one goal of our education and workforce portfolio is to strengthen and diversify our innovation economy. Key to this is ensuring that everyone in our communities have access to training and hiring opportunities, and that employers and educators partner to provide multiple on-ramps to success. To talk about creative talent development models we can learn from and we can replicate, particularly in the challenging context of the Great Resignation, it is my privilege today to introduce Natalie Pelusiai, Secretary of Labor for the State of California, and Sonu Ratra, co-founder and president of Akraya and board chair of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group Foundation. I hope you will enjoy today's conversation.
Thank you, David, and Natalie, welcome. I'm going to get started right now. So Natalie, the Great Resignation is underway, and according to U.S. labor statistics, according to the U.S. Bureau, 4 million Americans quit their jobs in September 2021. And what is worrisome is that this is not a trend anymore; it is a movement. And in California, just over 1 million jobs are still missing from the labor market as of September 2021. And there are 650,000 active job openings across the state's EDD. Now, what does this mean for our Golden State? And what is the impact on our industries, whether it is construction, retail, or technology? And I'm sure your agency is thinking about workforce challenges we face post-COVID. How do you think the administration and the private sector can come together as it pertains to workforce development? What are your thoughts, Natalie?
Hi, Sonu. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here. So those are a lot of questions, and I'm going to try my best to respond, breaking down a lot of the different components and dynamics that we're seeing. So there has been a lot said about the Great Resignation and kind of the new trends that we're seeing in the workforce. I do want to emphasize that we are seeing things move in the right direction. The data is showing that we are regaining our jobs. We have regained 1.7 of the 2.7 that were lost during COVID. And California overall represents a quarter, at least in the last few months, of all of the new job growth in the country. So things are moving in the right direction, at least from a macro data perspective. But we do continue to hear a lot from employers and stakeholders anecdotally, and also in some of more like the micro numbers, that it is difficult to hire people. It is proving challenging to source talent, and that the workforce issues are not catching up with the speed with which the private sector is trying to recover. And so when we hear these things anecdotally, of course, we are concerned and we ask ourselves, what is going on? And we've read a lot about the Great Resignation, and sort of the reality here is that the world has changed, right? And people's mindset about the workforce and about what it means to be a productive member of the workforce has also changed. And so we are thinking about this, at least at the state level and at labor agency, in a few ways. The first is that we have to we have to face this reality that the world has changed. And I talk about this a lot internally with my own staff. We are also facing challenges with hiring. And so I often tell my managers and my directors, we can no longer assume that we can hire or expect the same from employees as we did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. And if the workforce is changing, if the expectations are changing, we also have to change in order to be more attractive to talent. So that's one thing, is really thinking about, we have to do things differently than we've done them in the past. Kind of getting more specific, I think we need to recruit differently than we've recruited in the past. And we need to stop thinking in such a limited fashion about what it means to bring talent into our organizations. I think, we have always wanted to bring in people who already, at least on paper, bring experience and talent and success in the field that we're looking for. And so what we're trying to do is have conversations with, our, employers across the state about pivoting that mindset and thinking about more strategically sourcing talent. And what does it mean to source talent? There are probably many innate skills that can be found in areas they haven't previously looked at, underserved communities, youth, individuals who are trying to return to work, older workers. And those are often groups that are not included in the traditional ways that we're used to recruiting. And so what would it mean to bring individuals, to expand and broaden our search to groups such as these? And so we are thinking about, what it means to bring government, private sector, community organizations together to better recruit individuals who have a lot of innate talent, but who can develop that talent and the actual skills while they're on the job. And shifting away from this mindset that we only want to attract college graduates or folks who have higher education, and instead think about how do we all come together as an ecosystem in the workforce development space to bring in talent earlier and develop that talent as they grow within the organization. And so COVID has been, this has been a great disruption to our economy and to the workforce, but I think within disruption, there is opportunity. We have to come together, reimagine the workforce system, and focus on other models that we know work, but we just haven't had the necessity of using in the past. And so maybe a little later we can chat a bit more about things like earning and learning models and apprenticeship models, and we can talk about how those things look and how they might grow. But I wanted to ask you, Sona, so one of the areas I think about, is that we're really, when it comes to women, what COVID has done and sort of the trends and what we've seen, these startling numbers, is that we're wiping potentially out, we're wiping out decades of progress that we've made, especially for women in the workplace, because we know that women were impacted, much more adversely with COVID in terms of job loss than men were. So I want to ask you a little bit, you talk a lot, I've heard you talk a lot about returnships, right? And thinking about women and how we can bring them back into the workplace. And I'd love to hear a little more about your thinking on that, because I think that's a big part of this puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. And Natalie, you said something that struck a chord. You said the world has changed, and it has dramatically changed for women in particular. And it isn't that before the pandemic, women weren't leaving the workforce. They have been leaving the workforce for childcare and several other reasons.
Right.
But the pandemic, clearly and disproportionately impacted women. And if you look at the numbers, they're very startling. About 2.4 million women left the workforce during the pandemic. 1 in 4 continued to leave through the pandemic. Women of color were severely impacted. And this number is just is insane. In 2020, 140,000 jobs were lost. They were all lost by women. Now we're talking about the Great Resignation, right? When we speak of the Great Resignation, we're really referring to the Great Resignation of women. Women have been the ones that have been the most impacted, and their participation in paid labor today is the lowest we've seen in 30 years, and that is just not acceptable. And if you think about it, if 1% of moms leave the workforce, the cost is about $8.7 billion of lost wages. And that is, that's a huge number. Now, companies can certainly, and administration can certainly do a few things to bring women back into the workforce. And one of the things, like you said, is, how do we think creatively? How do we think about not really truly looking at degrees, right? Not truly looking at just what's on their resume, but really looking at what is the skills they bring, what is the aptitude, what's the attitude. If you think about moms, they are multitaskers. They have led, their PTAs, they lead Lego robotics. So they have skills that are completely transferable to jobs. So companies really need to think about how can they create pathways. And one great pathway is returnships, which is like internships, but they are for moms or women. And this is creating maybe perhaps 16 weeks programs where there's onboarding, coaching, mentoring, guidance, and really helping them build those skills that can then really companies can take advantage of.
Absolutely.
Now, Natalie, I wanted to ask you, I know you're very passionate about apprenticeships, right? And really bringing youth back and really making sure no one's left behind. Can you share some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, California it's one of the reasons I took this job, and coming from the East Coast was that, California is very innovative when it comes to facing challenges in the workforce and thinking about how to create real pathways for people into the middle class and beyond. And so it serves as an example for the rest of the country. And one of those strategies is what we call apprenticeships. And, many of us have heard of apprenticeships, specifically in the trades, the construction careers. And those have proven to be amazing opportunities for people to come in and earn while they are learning on the job. They're both working, they're both taking, classroom training, and they're earning at the same time. What hasn't happened, and what I am looking at with my team at Labor, is trying to figure out how can we grow these models in the non-traditional space, because there is such opportunity. And in many cases, a lot of employers are already doing this. They bring in cohorts, they train them, they try to leverage the community college system and those state dollars to provide in-classroom training. And so we've seen some great examples of how this is happening. The question is, how can we invest to really incentivize more companies to think about these models, and also help the community organizations that are looking at sector practices? Really, how can we help incentivize and sustainably fund this model for a while until the value proposition is very clear, and then it begins to run itself? And so, apprenticeship, it's a really important model. It brings in people from sort of the non-traditional and disadvantaged communities that we often don't think about when we post something on LinkedIn, or they have several components, and part of it is the recruitment of individuals. There's an opportunity to create more equity in how we reach out to the workforce. And then it really develops a model for learning and earning at the same time, which includes on the job training, in classroom training. It could even be advanced, education training. But I think these are the sorts of models that are going to, if we can find a way to incentivize growth, and that's what I think the state's role is to really think about how we can move the needle in the non-traditional space. I think these are the sorts of models that are going to attract workers. They're going to attract younger people. And I think they're going to retain workers as well, because workers then feel like they are invested in, they have a voice, they can be, part of training future workers. And it sort of becomes this very self-sustaining employee development model. But it requires partnership, and it requires partnership by the state, by not-for-profit organizations and community organizations, and then of course the private sector who is employing these individuals and paying their salaries. So yeah, that is, that to me is an extremely important model, and we are looking at ways to expand that. I think one more thing I will say is it's really important in the state that we're in this changed world, that companies not go at this alone. So, to the extent that they can partner with their local workforce development boards, with nonprofit organizations in their communities, and really create a sector approach to recruitment, they're going to be more successful. So if you're in healthcare, in a particular region, and you're partnering with other healthcare companies, and you are working with your local workforce development board, with the state labor agency, with your community organizations, such as the one that you have, Sonu, then you become a much more powerful vehicle for recruitment, development, and retention.
Yeah, absolutely, Natalie. I mean, California is relying on innovation, right? And to fuel innovation, you need the right talent, and which means you need to hire the right talent, attract the right talent, and then retain the right talent. And I think companies have to just get creative about whether you're impact sourcing, whether you're hiring young workers, or you're hiring women who are going back to work. I think we all need to work together to create that economy that we really want. Thank you, Natalie. And I
Exactly.
think we're right on time. Appreciate your thoughts and appreciate your, wanting to do more for our California region. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Cynthia LaRive, Chancellor of the University of California, Santa Cruz. I'm a proud member of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group Board of Directors. The group's goal to support and enrich the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem of Silicon Valley aligns with our own commitment to serve the greater community. UC Santa Cruz aims to transform California and the world through pioneering public interest research and innovation and creative scholarship. We drive inclusive learning that fosters creativity, critical thinking, interpersonal skills, and compassion, all with the aim of building a more just and equitable world. I'm happy to introduce a special segment we'll be running throughout today's event, a series of short videos called IE, Innovating Education. These feature some of the Bay Area colleges and universities offering cutting-edge programs that help to boost the economic vitality of our region and raise the prospects of our students and our community as a whole. I'm thrilled to start with my institution, UC Santa Cruz, the UC of Silicon Valley. Please take a look.
We are where real change starts.
Where Global Research University takes root.
At the edge of the Pacific Ocean, amid the cliffs and the forests of the California Central Coast.
Where new voices push societal, intellectual, and research boundaries.
And seek to reimagine and rebuild society structures.
Where the promise of tomorrow drives our best work today.
Where social and environmental justice are taught and lived.
Where academic rigor and experimentation offer the adventure of a lifetime and a lifetime of opportunity.
Where listening leads to empathy and a deeper understanding.
Where strength and confidence are found.
In the daily effort to build on what's been learned.
And we, the researchers and the justice seekers.
The artists and creators.
The problem solvers and the makers.
Our voices will define the century.
And we will change ideas into action.
In action into transformative change.
UC Santa Cruz.
The real change is us.
Good morning. My name is Ahmad Thomas, a CEO here at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. And today I am thrilled to announce a first of its kind national partnership to diversify our STEM talent pipeline and significantly enhance Silicon Valley's innovation infrastructure. The Silicon Valley Leadership Group is partnering with the United Negro College Fund to address longstanding challenges and systemic gaps in recruiting and retaining diverse STEM talent among our leading companies. And specifically, our initial aim will be to provide opportunities to match leading Silicon Valley employers with historically Black colleges and universities to develop training and hiring opportunities for students. At SVLG, we bring significant regional experience to bear, having successfully worked with Bay Area community colleges, governments, and nonprofit partners to expand career horizons for diverse and non-traditional students to create a robust pool of talent for our member employers. We also continue our strong partnerships with all of the major universities in the region to align on future workforce placement and talent development. We all recognize that far more needs to be done, particularly when it comes to Black students and Black STEM talent. And there's no better partner than UNCF, the nation's largest and most effective minority education organization, which awards over 100 million in scholarships each year, administers more than 400 programs supporting over 60,000 students. So I know Dr. Lomax and team are very busy. And again, to drive the change we need to drive, Partnering with UNCF and us bringing the strongest network of executives in Silicon Valley, we could not be more excited. To initiate the partnership, our next keynote panel will feature the CEO of the United Negro College Fund, Dr. Michael Lomax, and the presidents of 4 leading historically Black colleges and universities. In the coming weeks, we will share with our members and the wider Silicon Valley community an exciting slate of programming designed explicitly to move the needle on diverse pipelines and Black STEM talent here in the Valley. Dr. Lomax, Presidents Newkirk, Campbell, Verrett, and Glover, welcome to the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. We have been looking forward to this conversation with this esteemed panel, and it is truly my sincere honor to turn to you now, Dr. Lomax. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmad. And we promised to be first names, Ahmad, Michael, and and it's so wonderful to be with you and to be with the big audience that we have out there in Silicon Valley. So I'm going to make a few introductory remarks, and then I'm going to introduce the panel, and I'm going to tell everybody what the questions are going to be, and then we're going to get into it, and we're going to try and have a really robust and informative conversation. On November 26th, the Wall Street Journal editorial board published a powerful 6-paragraph editorial entitled, and I quote because it's a long title, "A Black Path to the Middle Class, New Research on the Upward Mobility of HBCU Grads," close quote. The research they referred to was a study produced by United Negro College Fund's Frederick D. Patterson Research Institute, titled, and it's got a long title too, HBCUs, Transforming Generations, Social Mobility Outcomes for HBCU Alumni. The journal wrote, "The U.S. has 101 accredited historically Black colleges and universities representing a combined student population that is more than 75% Black. The unique contribution of this study is to examine students from the bottom 2 quintiles of household income, $46,000 or less, and then find out how many later make it into the 3rd quintile or above. Social and economic mobility, a big and important deal in our nation." The journal concluded their editorial by quoting directly from this study, which they are affirming validity of. And I want to quote that. "On average and across institution type, when it comes to mobility rates, HBCUs outperform all other categories and are double the national rate, being the primary post-secondary driver moving Black Americans from poverty to the middle class," close quote. Now, HBCUs are just 3% of all 4-year American colleges and universities. They enrolled just 10% of all Black students attending college, but they produce 17% of all Black college graduates and 25% of all Black STEM graduates. HBCUs produce 80% of all Black judges, 50% of all Black doctors, 50% of all Black teachers. HBCUs punch above their weight. And if America is to move more Black Americans into the middle class, HBCUs must prepare even more graduates for 21st century careers, all of which, in some way, will be STEM and tech careers. To prepare more HBCU grads for 21st century work, our UNCF HBCU partnership with Silicon Valley Leadership Group is not a nice to have. It is a must have. Our higher education summit today actually has bigger aspirations, in my view. than just successful collaboration and partnership between HBCUs and Silicon Valley companies. We should aspire to exemplify the best higher education tech partnerships that will move Americans into the opportunities and prosperity of our dynamic tech sector, giving them tickets to the middle class that will keep the American dream alive. Today, I am joined by 4 extraordinary HBCU presidents who are driving the work on their campuses. Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell, the president of Spelman College in Atlanta. Dr. Reynold Barrett, president of Xavier University of Louisiana in New Orleans. Dr. Glenda Glover, president of Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee, and the international president of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. She represents some of the most important and talented Black women in the world. And finally, our final president, Dr. Van Newkirk Sr., president of Fisk University, also in Nashville. Now, I'm going to ask them 4 questions. I'm going to tell you what they are, and we're going to try to have a good conversation based on those questions. The first is going to be, I'd like each of them to just tell us a little bit about their own institution and some of the powerful and exciting work that they are doing there. Then, since COVID and the racial reckoning that followed the murder of George Floyd, American companies and corporations and the nation writ large have rediscovered historically Black colleges and have shined a bright light upon them. I'd like to ask them what's happened to their institutions, what's been good, and what could be better about what has happened. Then each of these institutions is located in a community that is really, in its own way, a very focused tech sector community. New Orleans, Nashville, and Atlanta all have burgeoning, strengthening tech sectors. Have they developed strong relationships with companies there? What's been good about that? And again, what could be better? And then the final question that I want to close with is this great opportunity to work with Silicon Valley Leadership Group. What would you aspire to have happen there? How would you help us define the opportunities of the future? So with those questions, let me begin with my colleague at Spelman College, Mary Schmidt Campbell, and ask Dr. Campbell to tell us a little bit about what's happened at Spelman over the last 19 months, what's been good about it, what could be better.
Oh, Michael, I thought you were going to ask me over the past 140 years, but I'll try to make it shorter than that. But Spelman was founded in 1881, which makes it the oldest liberal arts college for Black women in the country. And really, the mission hasn't changed in 140 years because it was always about bringing Black women onto the campus and giving them the skills they needed to succeed, not only for themselves, but for their families and their communities. And so in the 19th century, yes, that was reading and writing. And in the 20th century, it was nursing and education and missionary work. And then around the civil rights era, that's when you saw these brilliant lawyers, doctors, scientists coming out of Spelman. And then Spelman made a really significant decision just at the end of the civil rights movement. A group of women, mathematicians and scientists on campus made the decision that they wanted Spelman to be the principal center for the training and education of Black women scientists. And so for the past 50 years, they have been honing strategies to prepare students even before they start college, to hire faculty who are devoted to research and to teaching, to develop cohorts, and to really make our students the most competitive they can be. And as a result, Spelman is now the leading producer of Black women who earn PhDs in this country. That's of any college or university, which is extraordinary when you think of the fact of how under-resourced we are when you compare us with other elite colleges and universities. So I'll stop there.
Great story. More to follow. Dr. Verrett, tell us a little bit about Xavier University of Louisiana. You're on mute, Dr. Verrett.
Thank you. I'm so happy here with my fellow colleagues, my fellow presidents. Well, what I would say at Xavier has been educating students for the highest at the highest levels. Even though we have never seen ourselves as a selective institution. We have students who come with a whole range of what I call pre-collegiate education, knowing that not all students get the education that they deserve, but they need to accomplish when they finish. Yes, in the healthcare sectors, we educate more African Americans to become physicians than any school in the country. But let me speak about our efforts in STEM, where we send more African Americans to doctoral advanced study, doctoral programs in the sciences, in the physical and life science than any school in the country. We've been doing this consistently, and it's because of how the faculty interact with our students. And so I may be jumping to a later question of Michael by speaking of why our students succeed at HBCUs like ourselves. It's because of a faculty that engage students in very special ways, and especially getting them to actually practice their disciplines. So they are in laboratories with faculty. They are actually junior scientists even before they arrive in graduate schools or wherever they go. And the range of sciences that we create at Xavier has been continuing in expanding to new programs, but also it's the expectation that students are challenged very early in their education, discover their weaknesses, and are repaired so that they can succeed. And the key element is basically how we select a faculty that reproduces itself, that intentionally creates a faculty that can meet those needs for students. And what we find is that the talent that we find in students, no matter where they come from, that there's a rich trove of talents, and these students manifest that.
Wonderful. Dr. Glover, let's switch over to Tennessee State University, a public institution.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for allowing this important dialogue on the record regarding HBCUs and the partnerships that we're trying to foster. And I am Linda Glover. I serve as president of Tennessee State University in Nashville. TSU is a comprehensive urban land grant HBCU with over 8,000 students. We offer degrees at the bachelor level, the master's level, and the doctoral levels. We are a research institution. R2 institution means the second level of research, higher than average. Highest, of course, is the top research institution, where we have Harvard and all those. But the second level, there are 11 HBCUs that are in that second group of research schools, and Tennessee State is one of those. Well, we know that our country cannot reach its goals without strong, sustainable HBCUs, the goals necessary to close the education gap, the health gap, the wealth gap, the economic gap. And so we appreciate the work that UNCF has done over the years, especially more recently, to work with HBCUs and TSU in that regard. So TSU, we know our mission. We got started in 1912. HBCUs were founded 185 years ago to educate the newly freed slaves. We had that mission. And so we are bought into that mission. We still are educating students. We still are taking them through the transformative power of higher education, despite the discrimination in funding, despite the diverted funding for state schools, despite the inadequate facilities, we've managed to excel. I love the statistics that you went through when we got started, because I think it's a good starting point to lay the groundwork of what we have done with 3%. I mean, we're having 3% of the students, but yet graduating the great percentages. And so that says a whole lot about what we're doing. And TSU is playing its role to graduate students. We are a state-supported school. We're not a state-funded school totally. We say we moved from state institutions, state-supported, because only about 26% of our funds come from the state, and the rest come from people like UNCF and others. So we thank you for all that you've done to assist the non-private schools in remaining viable.
Thank you. Dr. Newkirk, another Nashvilleian and a member of UNCF, Fisk University. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Fisk in this important arena?
Well, we're just so happy that you invited us to be here today. At Fisk University, we're the oldest institution of higher education in Nashville. We're founded in 1866. And what's so important about our university, and we pride ourselves on it, is that we are committed to social justice. If you go out our administration building, you'll see steps that lead down our institution, from the institution to Meharry Medical College. And we gave the land for Meharry Medical College. And those steps were designed in that way so that our students, when they graduated, they would go down those steps and become doctors. And we're one of the major producers of PhDs or MDs in the nation from an HBCU. And what's so important about us in those things in social justice, we've graduated a lot of the leaders of social justice throughout history, and we still are graduating leaders in social justice. People like W.B. Du Bois, John Hope Franklin, John Lewis, and we're graduating comedians like Kim Whitley, but we're also doing things in STEM, which is very important for us as a small university. We have an enrollment of approximately 1,000 students, and of our majors, about 1/3 of our students are in STEM fields. We have new majors in bioinformatics, data science, computer science, robotics, and physics. All of those fields are designed so that we can actually tackle this issue of social, what we call re-engineering. We want to make sure that we get African Americans and minorities in those fields, and we're doing our job to push those students through. We have a very high graduation rate at this university, and that's on purpose. We keep our classes small, our faculty are close to our students, and we bring our students along in this whole piece that we call a lockstep process, in which our students have access to faculty and faculty have access to our students, and we monitor and measure progress. So those things are things that we are happy with what we're doing, and we're happy with this university as we move forward. So I think those are the keys to this university, and we want to continue to be a mover in social justice in this city.
Thank you very much, Dr. Newkirk. Let's bring this to the last 19 months. Dr. Schmidt-Campbell, I know that Spelman has been very busy during this period of time. And maybe if you could just say a little bit about operations during this period of time, and also a little bit about opportunities that have arisen.
Right. Yeah, when the pandemic first struck, I think all of us were, completely caught by surprise. Spelman certainly had not been doing remote learning to any large extent, either on the part of our faculty or our students. But what this gave us an opportunity to do was really to explore the capacity of online learning. And with that, the ability to expand opportunities by not needing to have people in person. So that meant if I wanted to put together a summer virtual internship in data science, I could invite all kinds of experts from all over the country to engage with the students. And even if the students couldn't be in person, they could have access to data sets that were stored electronically. They could cluster in teams, and they could still do the same kind of deep dive analysis that they would do were they in person. So this ability to be more inventive and be more innovative, I think actually had a side to us that drove us, I think, to think much more expansively about what the possibilities were. That meant we could think very carefully about a new set of strategic partnerships. We are partnering with the Broad Institute, for example, in my biomedical research, at the MIT Harvard Institute. And that enabled our students to get lectures about COVID and about the development of the virus that would have been completely inaccessible to them. We have partnerships with medical schools, Penn Medicine. We are just starting a partnership with Johns Hopkins that will give our students a pathway into graduate school. But also we began to do a number of partnerships with corporations. So looking at corporations and their strengths that they could bring to Spelman in terms of adding capacity, we partnered with IBM. which has its specialty, or one of the things it focuses on, is quantum computing. And that was a whole new discipline for us, not only for our students, but for our faculty to have opportunities to interact and to hone their skills. With Google for a long time, we've had a great partnership where they have brought Googlers to campus to teach. Microsoft is another company that we've been working with for years, and that engagement also ramped up. So the extent to which these strategic partnerships were able to expand and deepen, this actually turned out to be a very good opportunity for us.
Thank you very much. Dr. Verrett, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing over the last 19 months at Xavier.
Well, besides negotiating through the pandemic, and also the visit of Hurricane Ida more recently, so we had a hurricane coming through here as well. The university also developed a resource of flexibility. Clearly, with the pandemic, we adapted to the pandemic to keep the campus very safe. But among our partnerships was to establish a major thermocycling testing center on campus that served ourselves as other institutions, but also remains a resource for further teaching, especially as we do population sciences, especially in public health as well in the future. That will be coming to us here. But also what we did learn from adapting ourselves to remote learning were what were the strength and weakness of remote learning and how we adapted to our students. What we did learn is that we are able to offer programs, and our faculty develop capacities for teaching remotely that they may not have avowed that they had at the time, and they train and develop those skills. At the same time, we also saw the need for engaging our students more directly. And those were weaknesses that in our analysis of the COVID period, we saw where we could re-engage, especially with our first generation students, to see how we support them, because that distance was actually a distance too far. So there are many new initiatives that we are putting in place because it is about getting those students to succeed. What we do also look at is the development of new programs at the same time. For example, and our programs are fundamentally interdisciplinary. For example, what we see now in our programs in genomic counseling, where there are probably less than maybe 2 or 3% of genomic counselors of color in this country. And as we are going into new areas of medicine, integration of not only our areas in the science and health, but also it interfaces with our areas in data science as well. Now, so these new programs were developed in many ways, reflecting through the pandemic period what we had learned. But also what we also have doubled down on are the need to increase representation in many disciplines, not only in the health fields, but other fields as well, because from the COVID period, we learned that representation was a risk not only to ourselves, but to the larger community as well. So in other educating talent to actually be able to be present in many fields and areas was important for us. So that engagement of faculty in developing new programs where those are needed is something that we've reinforced through the COVID period as well.
Thank you. Dr. Glover? You're on mute. Yeah.
Thank you. But before I get started, I wanted to say to Dr. Smith-Campbell, I agree that with all the great things you said about Spelman, because my daughter attended Spelman, and she would just be unbelievably upset if I didn't say that in this forum. So I say yes to all that you said earlier. Now, it's COVID, we had, during this last 19, 20 months, we had so many students had to return to their homes and communities and could not engage in online education because of poor infrastructure. So seeing where we were at that point in time made us have to introspectively take care of things at a different level. We had to depend more on our alumni, our partners, other organizations. We had to really do things that made us think at a different level. Students did not have the proper broadband. They had limited to no connectivity. They didn't have the laptops and technology devices, the iPads that we need. They had the cell phones, of course, but the cell phones would not take them far enough. So you're only able to do limited classwork. They could log on to Zoom and participate in classes, but could not prepare papers or perform proper modeling, et cetera. And so it was really important to go back to our partners, and they came through. Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, really assisted us a lot, as well as the federal stimulus funding that you all, UNCF, worked so hard to make sure that we receive. We all worked hard, our respective congresspersons, to ensure that we had proper funding to assist us, but that was on an emergency basis. So once the emergency was deemed not to be such an emergency, although it still exists, but it helped us to get through, many of us, to get through these situations. And so we were pleased that we were able to just hone in on the support that we had. You cash down your buckets where you are. So we were able to go back to the individuals and the companies that we knew we could depend on. And so it just came through. And there were several others, but I was just naming the ones that were more at the STEM focus. And so COVID just taught us we could do things for ourselves, and we could go online, we put more programs online. The MBA, the data science program we just started, a doctorate in. So it's just, it allows us to do so many more things. I didn't know that until I watched my husband, that he could reconcile a bank statement, he could have a doctor's appointment on the phone, fix a lunch, eat the lunch, all within a certain period of time without even leaving his chair. And so we won't go back to those old days anymore, because it's a new era for us, because we can't waste this crisis. We never can waste a crisis. This one, we're in crises, and we'll make the best of all of us as college presidents and supportive organizations. So we're still living through it. It's not over yet, but we managed to, this year, the second year, we picked up a few things that we learned from the first year. So as it continues, we're going to continue to tackle it at a much higher level.
Thank you. Dr. Newkirk?
Well, what I can say that I echo what all my colleagues have said, but at Fisk, since we are a small institution, we are agile, we made a lot of changes as a result of the pandemic. We only had a few programs online when the pandemic hit, but we were a little ahead of the game in that we started the COVID-19 task force in February before many schools even thought about it. And so whenever we got into the pandemic and schools started closing down, we'd already had our plans in place. It allowed us to transition into it at a much easier pace. But the one thing that we found to be a problem is that many of our students didn't have the technology to do the homework that we needed them to do, to interact in classes. And so we started contacting our partners here in Nashville, people like T-Mobile, people like Google and others. They helped us to actually bring in some of the technology that we needed for our students. But we also found that the pandemic unleashed what I want to say, a lot of talent in the city who had no more time to spend with us. And that talent allowed us to actually send some of our students in our data science program over to HCA, Hospital Corporation of America, to work in some of their programs. We sent people over to Meharry to work in some of their programs. So our students got hands-on experiences as a result of the pandemic, but we would like to have more of those opportunities. And I think what's happening is that since we are now getting more technology, that technology kind of hindered us to an extent, having lack of technology to get some of the students involved, having some type of pipeline to get more technology and getting our students involved earlier would allow us to actually tap into some of the opportunities that have now existed, like these partnerships with HCA and partnerships with Meharry. We are also looking at our new majors. We had a lot of majors. We had 2 majors online when the pandemic hit. We actually expanded our offerings to a number of graduate programs. We expanded some of our undergraduate offerings online. That has helped this university because we never went to a campus without students. We kept 1/3 of our students on campus during the heat of the pandemic. And that allowed us to keep the campus vibrant and have our students interacting with our faculty. But what we wanted to do as we go forward is to try to see if we can expand our technology assets as we go forward. So I think that's important for us as a university.
Now, I told you I was going to just limit this to 4 questions, but I want to throw a little bit of a curveball and stay for a moment on the pandemic itself. And because you've all referenced it, you've talked about the challenges that many of your students faced because they didn't have 75% of the students who attend HBCUs, and this will be different, so you can tell us a little bit about your own institution, are low-income students. About 50% are first generation. And so when they went home, they went back to communities where, they didn't have all of the assets that they needed to continue to learn. How did that affect your institution? What did you learn about your students and their determination and their resilience? And also, what did you learn about your faculty? Because and then, you know, are you growing after this? I mean, just give me a little bit more about what's happening, because and also, how seriously did your students take the requirements to you know, as they've come back to your campuses this fall, to keep masked, to follow the protocols, and what's that meant in terms of, you know, infection rates on your campus? I know it's a lot, so you don't have to answer all of them in that order, but give me a little bit more about the Spelman experience.
So Michael, we learned that 79% of our students had never taken a course online, ever. And about the same percentage of our faculty had never taught a course online. So we had a community that was not up to speed. And it meant intensive training for our students and really intensive training for our faculty. And understanding that it's not a one-time thing, that we have to continually be attentive to what the differences are between in-person and online. And it goes from everything from the design of the curriculum to understanding how to make sure your students can hear you on a Zoom call, or whether or not, to your point, when students go back to their homes and to their neighborhoods, whether you're going to ask everybody who's on the Zoom call to turn their cameras on. The second part of that is the technology. Everyone here on this call talked about the technology shortage, that our students simply were not equipped and our faculty were not equipped. They may have had computers, but they were 15 years old, right? So we did a massive retooling with the help of stimulus funds. So thank you, UNCF, for all of those good efforts, but a massive retooling for laptops, tablets, hotspots, making sure we had, for those students who were, as we populated the campus, upgrades on our campus, because all of a sudden, we had one level of need in terms of a network. And when our students came back, we literally had to upgrade that by exponentially by 10 times. So our own upgrades on campus to be able to support a vastly increased amount of network activity were all things that we've done, which turned out to be very good for Spelman, because for the past 5 years, we have been planning to develop a massive online platform for adult learners. And so that accelerated rapidly, and we're launching that in January. We never could have done that without the pandemic.
Yeah, so you know, you found a silver lining. Reynolds, yes, I know definitely. You did as well. Tell us a little bit about NOLA and Xavier.
Well, I think I would reemphasize what Mary just spoke about: laptops, hotspots, et cetera, because what we found is our students, many of our students went home to internet deserts. So we were FedExing, UPSing loaners laptops, especially hotspots, because some students did not have the bandwidth in order to be engaged in their courses. But what also, at the same time, we were actually using this as a teaching moment, because it was, as we examined ourselves in the pandemic, both from a purely scientific, but also a sociological experience. We're talking about our responsibilities, the perceptions of ourselves as Americans, whether we're autonomy versus communitarian expectations were on duty, what was expected. So we spoke about why we were masking and why we were taking vaccines. For example, when our vaccination, it was not a debate among our students, because we quickly came up to more than 96% of vaccination among faculty and staff, because we're having those conversations. So it was an educational moment for us as well. But I think the other part was also thinking deeply about not so much what we were doing purely technically, but also preparing ourselves for the future of being able to be very flexible and conversations across many disciplines, so that we're constantly between the sciences and the social sciences. For example, I'll give an example of what our mass communication and journalism and public relations students and faculty were doing, working with us and putting the communication and informing people what they needed to do. At one point, they were presenting their results at the White House, because that experience of actually crossing among what are clearly Balkans of fields of knowledge, between the social sciences and the sciences. There was much more conversation about understanding what were the scientific issues, and also how we must communicate these to actually move people to where they need to be safe. So that really created a lot of curricular and imagination on our campus as well.
Absolutely. I mean, and it didn't hurt that the person you were presenting to was from New Orleans in the White House. I mean, you had your former congressman there helping to craft the strategy on how we were going to get more
strategy as well. Exactly.
So thank you to get the shots. Yes, Dr. Glover.
Yeah, I want to add just about the vaccination part of it. Is that how we were able to get almost 70% of our students on campus vaccinated, and we were able to offer an incentive to them. Those who could show proof of vaccination would give them $100. We can't give them cash. We give them $100 gift card. And then those who lived on campus and could show that same proof got an extra $50. So they got $150. And there was a line, almost like a registration line, to get the gift cards. And then the faculty and staff said, "Well, what about us? We didn't vaccinate it." So we got this to be extended to the faculty and staff also. So we have 80 in the high 80s. I didn't get the percentage this morning, but about 85% of our faculty and staff have been vaccinated. We were able to offer that incentive, and that really helped because we don't have a mandate. We're not allowed to have a mandate for vaccination, and I'm not sure if we would anyway. But that I want to throw in that part. And we all said we had the similar situations about not having enough the space, the technology we needed, the poor infrastructure. We've already gone through that, but it was to getting back the fall to show how are we going to do this now. We need to make sure and as we started letting up a little, even though the Delta variant is real, we were saying we had to make the students understand that we can't just be out. Nothing can be so tightly packed inside. So we had to move some activity to the outside. And not have it. So and the students had a high level of understanding. We were glad they understand and worked along with us. And then homecoming was a big deal this year. The whispering was, well, we're going to cancel homecoming. We decided not to. We just kept homecoming as well. There's no homecoming like a homecoming at Tennessee State University. We all know that. So everybody's count can concede that. So and so the homecoming, we only had 5 cases. New cases after the homecoming. We had so many more alums and visitors and guests to come. So we were very pleased with how well it turned out and how well students, faculty, and staff are cooperating.
Dr. Newkirk?
Well, I think, there was so much going on, but, here, getting our faculty used to new technology was something that was really important. And so we had to actually get more training to our faculty, get them into new technology. But we found out during this pandemic that we had to get other areas used to it, our admissions. And so our admissions got into new technology, and that's helped us to broaden our appeal across the nation. We're doing so much more now that we have not done before. And in fundraising, all across the nation using new technology, things that we had not even thought about in the past. In the past, we were just face-to-face fundraising operation, face-to-face admissions operation. Now we're nationwide, and we see that our applications are going up, and during the pandemic, our enrollment actually increased. And we did something very unique here in the enrollment, in the pandemic, is this. We decided that we wanted to give all of our students a FISC experience on campus. And so we decided that we'd bring our freshmen in by themselves to live on campus for 7 weeks. We found that helped us with our enrollment, helped us with retention, because those freshmen came in and enjoyed a campus that had no other students on it but them. We got a chance to focus on our freshmen, and those freshmen, they got to have all these experiences that they typically would not have in the midst of a pandemic. And then the freshmen went home, and we brought our upperclassmen back for 7 weeks of experience on the campus. That was very unique, but what we found is that the next semester when we brought everyone back, we started looking at our retention numbers. We were retaining somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of our students. When we got to the next fall, we looked to see how many of the students that were here that came back. We're in the high 80s, and so we found that to be very beneficial for what we had done and how we had tried a whole new method. But that technology gap is something that all of my colleagues have pointed out. That kind of hindered us a bit, but we want to see how we can move forward. But throughout this whole process, We only had 13 cases of COVID in the fall. And in the spring of the next year, we had about 11 cases of COVID. So we've been very, very careful and cautious of how we move forward in this whole process. And our students have been very responsible in living up to the mandates of the university and wearing masks and taking those masks and going inside of the buildings. And our faculty have had a whole new experience because our faculty were very leery about teaching at first. We got our faculty involved in this whole process. And then we saw that our faculty who'd been leery, some of the leaders are teaching our students and going into the classroom with the mask and making sure our students got that hands-on experience at FISC.
So I'm going to just say what I think I heard, and that is that all 4 of your institutions have experienced stronger retention and growth in enrollment, which was, let's just face it, that was not the storyline we were expecting in March of 2020. And I think it's true to say about the HBCU sector, the sector itself is stronger financially and in every other way today than it was 19 months ago. Anybody want to add anything on that?
We had our largest first year class ever. We had almost 750 first year students. We usually get about 550. And as for fundraising, we had a capital campaign. We've exceeded that campaign. We exceeded that campaign about 6 months ago, the target. Yeah.
Anybody else want to brag here? Come on. I know this is.
You know, we like talking about our universities.
I know you do. So just that, because I got a question after that.
And so I'm going to agree. We had our largest freshman class also, over 1,600 students for the first time. And of course, we had a larger retention than we normally have. We're just, and the fundraising has increased. People are calling up, do you need anything? I got a call from someone at USDA, Agriculture Department. They said, we have some extra money. Can TSU use any extra funding? I said, is this a trick question or what? Of course we can use extra funding. So they said, well, we did have some money left over. We wanted to make sure it was related to goats. And we talked to one school and they said, goats, ew, we don't want goats. I said, well, no, TSU, we love goats. And so it's been one of those time periods where you make the best out of a bad situation. And that's what we've done. And we're really pleased that the students have come back the way they have, because the parents want the students to come back and the students want to come back, because the parents have told us, please, you told us they want to come back in the fall. I want you to keep your word.
So obviously big growth on the, so we haven't done all the data analysis yet, but while other sectors of higher education have had declines in enrollment, HBCUs are continuing to grow. So I want to switch to the local level for your communities and the work you're doing there. Tech has discovered the South, and a lot of tech operations are opening up and locating in the South. And there was an earlier story about why some of the companies are choosing places like Atlanta and New Orleans and Nashville. And in part, it's because they want a more diverse pipeline of talent, and they know that talent is where those HBCUs are. So can we go around and just say a little bit about what you're seeing happen in Atlanta and New Orleans and in Nashville with your relationships with the corporate sector and the tech sector in particular? Mary?
Sure. Atlanta has always been very friendly to businesses and corporations, and more recently to entrepreneurs. So I don't want to leave out that sector as well. But as you know, many companies are building their headquarters there. So you have, Microsoft building and Google and Apple Propel Center on the campus of Clark Atlanta University that's meant to serve HBCUs throughout the South. You have Accenture, BlackRock. I mean, it's just amazing how many companies are locating either their headquarters or some major division at Atlanta. And so we have been working very closely with many of these companies to develop the guidelines for a meaningful relationship. And by a meaningful relationship, I mean that they get to know us and the strengths that our faculty bring to bear, our students bring to the table, and our insights into teaching and learning that we bring to bear, as well as we learn what's needed in the workplace and the competencies and skills in the workplace. So we see this really as a reciprocal relationship. And we build it over the years so that as our students, as we become more acquainted with each other, they are helping us build capacity. We're helping them build capacity by providing pathways for our students into their workforce.
I love this two-way reciprocity. Reynolds, tell me a little bit about.
Well, if I might speak about two major thrusts that have been growing in New Orleans, in which Xavier is a significant partner, it's been the biotech and infotech sector, where with our economic development agency, GNO Inc., and also with No Big the Bio-Innovation Center, of which we are part, bringing new business and also startups in those sectors. And even that some of our faculty themselves have patented products that are being licensed through that as well. So that engagement in research and development, and also bringing partnerships with different industrial sectors has become an important piece. For example, we have technology firms in the infotech sector who are hiring our students who have been engaging with us in developing some of our programs like data science, and also in the biotech sector, our researchers are engaged. And what we're beginning to see is we're part of an ecosystem of other universities as well, bring that engagement in the city. So that's a workforce creation for the city of New Orleans, but also opportunities for our students and our faculty as well, because we do want our faculty to be more successful than their presidents.
Thank you. Dr. Glover?
Nashville, one of the fastest growing cities. You know, somewhere I saw it was number 6, somewhere else I saw it was number 8 in the country. And over 100 persons per day moved to Nashville. And so with that dynamic, we were able to really connect with the new companies that are moving here and those that are expanding their operations here. So it's a great place to be right now. But you mentioned earlier about the Black Lives Matter and all of that, and what COVID has done. We're coupled. COVID was coupled with the Black Lives Matter movement that really got larger the summer of 2020. And companies were calling on HBCUs and HBCU presidents to talk to. In the Nashville company, I talked to 1 or 2 firms here, well, maybe more than I talked to a handful of firms here about how we could assist them during this time period. And I said, well, the first thing you have to do is understand that you want to talk to HBCUs. You want to talk to HBCU presidents. HBCUs have capacity. We understand the community. We know what we know we can offer you a model that will work. You may talk, it's fine to talk to other types of organizations, but when you come to higher education, you really get a partner with a knowledge base to assist you in what you're trying to do operationally in the community and to lift up where you are in the community. And so we were able to talk to firms, and we sent them to different places. Even in Atlanta, we talked to a company, well, you have so many great HBCUs in Atlanta. We just said, take advantage of that, because we know who we are. We can do the right things to assist you. We know diversity. You may be diverse, but you're not inclusive. You can be diverse and not be inclusive. That's where you are now. Here's what you need to do to strengthen what you're doing. So we were able to have these one-on-one, face-to-face conversations with the corporations that are located here. And I think that has worked to the advantage of HBCUs as a whole, and particularly for Fisk and TSU and Meharry and ABC, because we're right here in Nashville. We know the community. We know how to assist.
Wonderful. Dr. Newkirk?
Well, I think what's happened here in Nashville is that, well, here at Fisk, we started a building a few years ago. One of our trustees built a building which is going to tie our industry to our majors. And what's happened is that we've got all type of traffic from new industry that's coming into town. as they want to talk about our majors. They want to talk about the partnerships that we can develop. Now, what's so important to us is that many of the corporations that have come to Nashville are multinational corporations, and they have tentacles all over the nation. So in the past, when we reached a corporation that was right here in Nashville, we only reached Nashville. But now when we talk to corporations, we're talking to people in maybe all over the nation, all over the world. And what we've seen is that opportunities have opened for us up on Wall Street. We've got partnerships now with Marsh & McLennan, partnerships with Asurion, partnerships with Google and other companies as a result of these multinational companies coming right here to Nashville. So it's opened up a lot of opportunities and doors for us. And we feel that it's only the wave of the future and that we'll be seeing more of this as we go forward in Nashville, because as President Glover said, this is one of the fastest growing cities in the nation. We're number 6, I think, or number 8. But because of that, all of that, those new companies that they come to town, they begin to look for us and look for HBCUs and those partnerships that we can develop. So I think that's where we're going. It's just the wave of the future.
Yeah, and
Michael,
you're just
Michael, I just want to add to what my colleagues have said, because it's driving us towards a new goal. I mean, we talk about graduation rates, and that's really important. But we're now looking at rates. We're aiming to get as close to 100% placement rate for all of our students, and that's the big opportunity that all these new partnerships offer.
Well, I mean, why don't we just continue with that a little bit? You know, as we think about this tremendous opportunity, I've just gotten the 5-minute warning that we have, and you guys have been great. We've answered a lot of questions. We've talked about a lot, but
we talk fast.
You know, what's the big goal that you would have? Mary, is it really the placement rate? What do you think is a big opportunity with us in Silicon Valley?
Our number one goal at Spelman is we call it deliver the Spelman promise. That if you come in through our doors, we'll make sure you graduate. That's our number one goal. But over time, you realize it's not enough to just walk out of the college with a degree. You know, you have to walk out with a lifetime of opportunity. And so now it is everybody who comes in graduates and leaves with a real professional opportunity that's launching their life.
Great. Dr. Barrett?
To follow up on what Mary is saying, I think it's also about the large equity piece about opportunity for our students. So what we need from our partners is opportunities to practice and develop their disciplines, which means the internships so that they can begin their careers. And I'm speaking about careers, not jobs, because our students will get jobs, but careers are what they will be able to fashion, some of it that we don't even imagine. For example, we have a program in robotics and mechatronics. Those students can go anywhere, but also what we want is actually up for them to actually engage and see where these new emerging fields actually play out in many areas. It's true that our students, what we are engaged in is the large equity project of the last 150 years, to actually be able to give equal opportunities to all these students of color, whoever they are. And education is the fundamental requirement. Now we need the partnership to actually let them get and use their great skills and play at becoming innovators and creators, which they have shown already. So now we need your help.
All right, Dr. Glover and Dr. Newkirk, we got 1 minute.
Okay. Well, I just want to say we want a true partnership with Silicon Valley, and not just one that is on a sheet of paper. We're looking for a true partnership where we look at our students, we hire our students. Not only that, you will help with incentives to keep our students on the STEM focus and helping them to get more into incentives for graduate school. And the one last caveat I'm going to say is, if you're really serious, you look at a Black, one of our presidents sitting on one of your corporate boards.
All right. And Dr. Newkirk, they just raised the ante there. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'd love to see us have interactive partnerships, just as President Glover has said, in which there are two-way partnerships and not just coming to campus visits periodically. We want to have partnerships which are really invested in the institution. And with that, we'd like to see resources poured into the institution for capacity building. That's important for us if we're going to get there and to maintain the levels of productivity that we're doing right now. So that's important for me in this institution.
You know, I will close by saying there are 101 HBCUs, and we've heard from 4 dynamic presidents in 3 of the dynamic communities where they're located. But, you know, the fastest growing communities are in the South. where our HBCUs are located: Austin, Texas, Houston, Texas, North Carolina. There are so many of those, and every one of those is a community with the wealth of talent and educational experience that you've heard here on this conversation today. I want to thank Silicon Valley Leadership Group for this and opportunity, and we invite you to get to know us better, and we hope that you'll invite us to get to know you better as well. Partnership ahead. Thank you.
All right.
Great job, team.
Woohoo. You outstanding.
Oh man, I feel like I've just run a race.
It's a good conversation. It's good to be with you.
Great to be with you. Great to see
Thanks
you
for
all.
having
Take care,
us.
everybody.
Good morning. My name is Audrey Soriano, Senior Associate, Racial Justice and Equity here at the Leadership Group. I'd like to thank Dr. Lomax and Presidents Newkirk, Campbell, Glover, and Verrett for that honest and engaging conversation. The Leadership Group is excited to work with you and learn from you as our partnership grows in the years ahead. I'd now like to introduce today's spotlight speaker, Dr. Joshua Mealy. Dr. Mealy is an accessible technology designer at our valued member company, Amazon. He is a blind scientist, community leader, an inventor with a history of developing innovative information accessibility solutions for blind people. And most recently, earlier this year, Mealy was named a MacArthur Fellow for developing devices to enable blind and visually impaired people access to everyday technologies and digital information. Please join me in welcoming Dr. and MacArthur Genius Award winner, Joshua Mealy.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the invitation. Thank you to the Silicon Valley Leadership Group for the invitation to come and speak to you today at the Higher Learning Summit. This is an extraordinary event with just amazing speakers, thinkers, and world changers. So just it's an amazing honor for me to be here. And of course, thank you to the MacArthur Foundation for helping raise the visibility of the importance of creativity in accessibility. Without their notice and attention, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group may not have noticed that I had a slot in my schedule available for this. So I'm really appreciative to to everyone today to allow me to kind of come and speak to you about the importance and role of accessibility and technology in the broader landscape of building inclusion. And in a 15-minute talk, there's really no way I could possibly cover all the things I would normally want to cover. So I'm going to have to keep it to some highlights. And for those of you who understand that there's a much deeper and broader conversation around this, please forgive me for glossing over some of the things that that I may need to abbreviate. So I will start by saying that I am a blind scientist, designer, inventor, activist, and of course, I wear many other hats. I'm a proud father and husband and family member, but the word blind comes first. And I do that intentionally. First of all, I am blind, but I'm proud to be blind. I am it is part of my identity and part of everything that I do. Everything that I do is influenced by the fact that I'm blind. Even when I don't do anything differently, the way I'm perceived in the world is part of what I do. And so it's really important to me to sort of highlight that I lead a blind first existence, and that everything that I do with pride as a blind person and as a proud member of the disability community much more broadly. And I'll be talking a lot about blindness and visual impairment. I want you to know that everything that I'm talking about here really applies very broadly to disability. Everything here is, I see blindness as sort of a smaller part of the larger community of people with disabilities, and it happens to be the one that I am most closely connected with. So I'll use that as sort of my entree into the topic. So I lead with blind, but I'm not expected to be proud of that. And that's really the part of the reason why I do it. There's a great deal of historical and societal shame around disability, around blindness. All you need to do is sort of look at the metaphors in our language and in other languages around disability and vision to realize that that people who are blind, people who are disabled, are not held up as glowing examples of success and capability. So really, there are very low expectations placed on people with disabilities, kind of across the board, at home, at school, in the workplace, and many of us don't even get to the workplace because of the low expectations and the difficulties we encounter early on. Some statistics say that up to 70% of people with disabilities in the United States are unemployed, and the numbers go up as you go global from there. So this is a real, this is not just a technical problem. I'm a technical guy, but it's a much broader problem that I think we need to grapple with. And so, but I have spent my career imagining and building the technologies that people need in order to do the things they want to do, and in particular, blind and visually impaired people. And the reason I do it, and the reason I've taken this on as my career challenge, is because we can't count on sighted people to understand what we need, to understand what the tools need to do, and what the contexts are where the tools need to operate. It's not it's because of this societal baggage and sort of systemic misunderstanding of what disability is and means, that we can't really expect people from the outside to be able to build the tools we need to do the things we want to do. So what I've really focused on is user-centered design, and user-centered design is essential in an accessibility context. Accessibility basically means building the tools that provide people with disabilities entree into the activities and actions that they want to participate in. So some examples of tools that I've built over the years. One thing is a thing called UDescribe, which is a free online tool for adding audio description to any YouTube video and then sharing that description with the world. Audio description is basically how blind people get access to video information, which if you don't have access to video, if you can't benefit from video, then you're really at a significant disadvantage. So video accessibility is very important, and yes, blind people need access to video. Another tool I've created is a thing called the Tactile Maps Automated Production System, TMAP. TMAP is a way of automatically, at very low cost, producing tactile street maps of anywhere in the world so that blind people can touch and feel and learn the routes of travel that they need in order to get to school, to get to work, to get to play. And these are, again, you might be surprised, think, oh, blind people can use maps, blind people need maps. Yes, we do. And unless you're able to recognize that, you wouldn't even think of doing it. And so that's another example of why user-centered design is so essential. I've also focused a lot of my attention, in particular, my work over the last few years, outside of Amazon, of course, has focused on STEM education and inclusion for blind people and people with disabilities in opportunities to grow and learn in STEM. But it's not enough to build the tools. The tools are not enough. Accessibility is just the technical side of disability inclusion. Inclusion really has a much broader scope and includes the way we think about disability as a society. The tools have influence on that, but this is why the word activist is in my list of things that I do, because I don't really, my favorite projects, my favorite technical projects are always the ones that have a social dynamic component to them. I want my tools to lead people to ask questions and learn more about what disability really means and how to think more deeply about disability and inclusion and what people with disabilities are capable of doing and the ways in which we need to adapt the world in order to do those things. I want to normalize disability. That is at the root of everything I do. One of the STEM projects that I've really leaned into is called the Blind Arduino Project. Arduino, some of you may know, is a hobby robotics electronics platform. It's a small, very inexpensive, open source computer platform, very versatile, very easy to work with, very easy to build. So it's used in a lot of hands-on classroom contexts where experiential learning is the key. So we a lot of STEM engineering, kids as young as first, second, third grade are working with Arduino to develop STEM skills, and the Blind Arduino project really is about developing the tools and documentation to include blind and visually impaired students and adults in this hobby robotics hands-on STEM education opportunity. And it's also an opportunity to introduce the idea of accessibility to the broader maker community, the community of sighted and non-disabled people who are engaged in designing these opportunities to bring kids in particular with from marginalized backgrounds who are have limited opportunities very often, to bring them to the table, to the STEM table, so that they can build careers and educations that include STEM. So a lot of the things that I've done have included workshops with blind kids where I teach them to solder, I teach them to build stuff with Arduino and hobby robotics. This is sort of pre-pandemic and hopefully coming back soon. And I always ask the kids, in sort of building rapport, these are mainstreamed blind kids that go to public school with sighted kids. I ask them, how many of you have have a hobby robotics or a robotics club at your school, and they almost all say, "Oh, me, I do. I have there's our robotics club went to compete in Las Vegas last year. They're very proud." And then I say, "How many of you are members of the robotics club?" And there's silence. And that silence is disturbingly informative, because these blind kids, they're not disinterested. They're in my workshop. They want to do hands-on robotics. They want to learn about STEM, but they're not being integrated into the opportunities that their schools are offering. And it's largely because the schools don't know how, and assume that these blind kids can't do it, and so don't offer them the opportunities. But I want these blind kids to have these STEM opportunities. If they decide not to go into STEM careers, I want it to be because they decided not to, not because nobody gave them the opportunity. So this is the Blind Arduino project is all about giving them the opportunity and teaching them, not only the blind kids that they can do it, but teaching their sighted colleagues, their sighted friends and teachers about accessibility, about design, about the fact that they can collaborate with students with disabilities and learn more, and that these, again, normalizing disability, creating an opportunity for everyone to understand that the world we're moving towards is one where disability is not going to be stigmatized, but where it's going to be a fairly normal, just part of our identities, not necessarily all of it. And so I want to kind of point out that diversity diversity includes disability, and I mean that in two different ways. I mean that in that people with disabilities are deeply underrepresented, no matter how you slice across society. People with disabilities are underrepresented in almost every category. So this is one way in which we need to do better with disability and diversity inclusion, and the other way is even perhaps more important, and that's that disability is one of the most deeply intersectional identities and situations that we can experience. There are, no matter what group you identify with, there are marginalized groups, people who are not included, not always thought of, not always invited to sit at the table, who have disabilities also. And to recognize that these kids and individuals are doubly underserved by the world that we currently live in. So the tools of accessibility are only a means to an end. And I want to say that end is really about building a world that values the voices and the contributions from everyone. And those contributions are going to be made in schools, in the workplace, and in popular culture. But we need to normalize disability in order to do that. So I want to invite you and all of us, let's build a world together where the blind kids that attend my workshops say, of course I'm in my hobby robotics club. Of course I'm part of that. Of course I'm included at that table. And I would also like to invite us to build a world together where I don't need to put blindness first in my identity because it becomes passé. Normalizing disability is everybody's business, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about it and to invite you on this journey with me. Thank you very much.
Since 1851, Santa Clara University has inspired generations of students committed to innovating with a mission. Graduates grounded in Jesuit social consciousness and ethical character formation. Global citizens on a mission to lead and shape society. On a mission to discover, to engage, on a mission to transform lives. The spirit of Silicon Valley thrives on our beautiful campus. Only here will you find a commitment to innovation and entrepreneurship in service to humanity. So we proudly embark on this historic campaign for Santa Clara to pave the way for generations to come, to open doors with scholarships and opportunities, to educate the whole person with transformational learning experiences. We are on a mission to make a difference.
Now is the time for Santa Clara to be recognized across the nation and around the world.
This is our mission.
Blue Shield of California is honored to be the thought leader sponsor of today's Higher Learning Summit. We also applaud Silicon Valley Leadership Group for their recent study, Staying in the Moment, examining post-COVID mental health practices for children. But even before the pandemic, mental disorders affected up to 1 in 5 US children each year. 50% of mental illness onset occurs before the age of 14, and 75% occurs by age 24. To address these sobering statistics, in 2019, Blue Shield of California launched the Blue Sky Initiative to support youth mental health throughout the Golden State. It reimagines and boosts mental health support for California's middle and high school students in a variety of areas. Blue Sky funds school-based programs with one-on-one therapy sessions for students most in need. This led to nearly 4,000 counseling sessions completed at close to 24 schools in the 2019 to 2020 year, including individual, group, family, and crisis counseling. Blue Shield of California's Blue Sky also began a collaboration with DoSomething.org, which led to a first-of-its-kind mental health guide created for students by students, with over 48,000 students participating. Blue Sky also worked with NAMI California to help high school students form close to 50 clubs statewide to raise mental health awareness and promote services. And because teachers are vital to youth growth and development, Blue Sky partnered with the California Department of Education to expand access to youth mental health first aid, to identify mental health warning signs in youth, and offer practical support for those in need of help. Finally, with the onset of COVID-19, it became clear that youth would need deeper community support to maintain healthy minds. Blue Shield of California's Blue Sky reached out to trusted community-based organizations with mini-grants to help youth access support outside of school. In its first year, Blue Sky provided $300,000 across 18 organizations, with mini-grants of $10,000 to $15,000 each to reach vulnerable populations and support youth needs. Despite these efforts, a continued stigma exists for many around seeking mental health support, especially for our youth. But the data is clear. Providing mental health services at school increases kids' access to care and improves school performance. So addressing mental health concerns early is vital, especially now with the complexity of our new normal. With that, we're proud to present our panel, Elemental Health, Children in the Pandemic Age. Please enjoy this important conversation.
Thank you again to our thought leader sponsors, Blue Shield of California, and for your tremendous work via the Blue Sky Initiative. Your work is not only timely, but also a great example of what a public-private partnership looks like. My name is Sarah Garcia, Director of Education and Workforce Development at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Welcome to this panel, Elemental Health, Children in the Pandemic Age. The consequential impacts of COVID on students' mental health became especially evident as students returned to campus this fall after a year and a half of physical distancing. All students have experienced varying levels of trauma, ranging from loneliness and isolation to anxiety, grief, and desperation over the loss of a loved one. For many with pre-existing mental health conditions, the impact was only compounded. Evidence of a rise in student depression, anxiety, and self-abuse during the pandemic has led to an increased awareness of a very real problem. The unfortunate events that occurred this week at Oxford High School highlight the need for proactive and preventative measures. In response to such needs, federal and state governments have made historical investments to support mental health. In September, our SVLG education team released a report entitled "Staying in the Moment: How Schools Are Supporting Mental Health as Students Return to In-Person Learning." I was privileged to have co-authored the report with Will Abed. In the report, we identified recommendations by clinical mental health experts and showcased key actions that Bay Area schools have taken to address the underlying stressors and concerns facing local youth. Our report contains feedback from districts across the Bay Area that collectively serve nearly 100,000 students every day. Overall, the report found that local school districts are investing increased funding in 3 key areas. 1, proactive investments in social emotional curriculum. 2, more teacher training to support student mental health. And 3, connecting families to specialized care via third-party organizations. We hope that this report serves as a toolkit for best practices in supporting students' mental health by showcasing the amazing work that our local schools are doing in that area. You can review our report in the chat box. I believe our colleague Christoph is going to drop a link in the chat. We're encouraged by the report released in October by the U.S. Department of Education entitled "Supporting Child and Student Social, Emotional, Behavioral, and Mental Health." It is a welcome step in raising national consciousness around mental health. And most importantly, it provides resources that highlight evidence-based practices to support students' social, emotional, and mental health needs. I am honored to be moderating this conversation, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome today's panelists. Co-author of the federal report, Ms. Katie Neese, Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services at the U.S. Department of Education. Christina Ishmael, Deputy Director of the Office of Educational Technology, U.S. Department of Education. And Dr. Christine Mouche, Chief Medical Officer at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Ladies, thank you again for joining this very important conversation. You all come from different perspectives on the issue, and we'd like to get a sense of this challenge from each of your points of view. Who is the student mental health crisis affecting now, and how? Deputy Assistant Secretary Neese, as the author of the Biden administration's report on behavioral health, we turn to you first.
Thanks so much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. We appreciate your mentioning our report that came out earlier this fall that we hope will be very helpful as states and schools look at how they can address the social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health needs of students. Our report found that prior to the pandemic, the escalating mental health needs of children and youth were largely unmet due to insufficient capacity, multiple barriers to care, and disparities across populations. The pandemic has only exacerbated existing inequities and heightened population-specific challenges based on school-level socioeconomic and housing status, race, color, national origin, ethnicity, language, immigration status, religious identity, and disability. Here is just one of our troubling findings. Emergency department visits related to mental health increased 24% for 5 to 11-year-olds and 31% for 12 to 17-year-olds between January and October of last year. So I'm very happy that we're having this very important conversation.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. We turn to you, Dr. Mouche.
Yes, thank you again. I echo Katie's comments that this is such a timely and critically important topic. We know that the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry have declared a state of emergency for youth mental health just last month. And that is related to the data that Katie shared and the experiences that many of us are having with our own families, neighborhoods, and schools. And what I would like to share is that from the suicide prevention perspective, it's very important for communities, schools, faith communities, really any structure that's in place where youth are, to have a plan to address mental health and suicide prevention. And there are resources to help those organizations that are earlier in their journey with all of that, to be progressing along that path. So it's not just about the moment that we're in. Yes, this pandemic is creating additional reasons for distress and suffering, but that is not the whole picture when it comes to the longer standing inequities and issues that children and young adults with mental health conditions and previous history of trauma, all of those issues related to racial and socioeconomic disparities, all of that is being accentuated right now during the period of pandemic for different populations in different ways. So I really want to encourage everyone that certainly the time is now to get involved, and everyone has a role to play in increasing and optimizing mental health and decreasing the risk for suicide in a population. And the last thing I'll say in this moment is that when it comes to the topic of suicide, it is really important that we speak accurately and clearly and carefully, because there are issues that relate to suicide contagion when we speak about it in broad sweeps, sensationalized terms, or inaccurately. And so one thing to note is that even while there are increases in the emergency department presentations that we just heard related to mental health distress and or self-harm, even though there are clearly increased prevalence and incidence of depression, anxiety, and even suicidal ideation during this time, especially for young people, that does not necessarily translate into increased rates of suicide. Even though risk is elevated, prevention is still very effective and can be implemented during a period like this. And I know that's a challenge for schools when you're dealing with so many policy related things that the pandemic has put upon schools, but now is certainly the time to prioritize youth mental health. And I think in this conversation, we hope to get into some of the resources and the strategies that whether you're just starting or whether you're looking to progress your journey in that regard, that we can point you to.
Thank you, Dr. Muche. An important call to action and lots of great resources there available to the community. Christina, what are your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, so at the Office of Ed Tech, we're taking a close look at efforts to identify the infrastructures and practices that we want to take forward as we navigate school reopenings and hopefully a new era of what education looks like that's supported with technology. We certainly had technology already in our classrooms long before the pandemic, but we want to see what it will look like I guess we're currently still in the pandemic. I don't want to speak too soon and say post-pandemic, but then certainly moving forward as well. We also know that mental health and K-12 social emotional well-being were concerning prior to the pandemic, as Katie first mentioned, but COVID certainly exacerbated these disparities. So I also find this topic incredibly personal for me as someone who manages depression and anxiety on a daily basis and attempted suicide my senior year of high school, long before social media or ed tech tools that might have provided the missing supports that I needed at that time of my life. So we understand the criticality of these conversations, and thank you for this session to normalize and destigmatize mental health, as well as develop our mental health literacy in our education spaces. I did have the incredible opportunity earlier this year to be a guest teacher for a large urban district in their return to in-person learning, and they had limited staffing for the 600 plus K2 students whose families decided to stay at home for a variety of purposes. So within a time frame of about 10 days, I curated and developed 2 weeks worth of content for K2 learners, and it was all built asynchronously. So I did not get to actually interact with the K2 students. But by this time in the pandemic, nearly every student had access to devices as well as the platforms that the district was using. And so my options were still limited as far as only being able to connect with them asynchronously. And in order to create sufficient content for a 60-minute literacy block, a 60-minute math block, as well as a 30-minute science and social studies block, I relied on a lot of existing resources and ed tech tools, as well as creating things from scratch, as many teachers know. As a former early childhood teacher, I also knew the importance of incorporating brain breaks into the content, as well as bringing mindfulness practices and more into our time together. And so I very intentionally built that schedule with that in mind. And so I use YouTube videos as well as recording my own movement videos. And we broach those subjects even in kindergarten. And so again, we know the criticality of these conversations, and we're so grateful to be able to be part of the conversation.
Thank you. And that is an exemplary way in which we can continue to support our students remotely. Thank you for your work in that. Dr. Muche, as Chief Medical Officer for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, how do you see the crisis playing out in our schools? And I know you touched upon it briefly in your opening comments. Please tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that schools have a huge load of change and pivoting and customization and trying to listen to the voices in the community. And it's a very, very challenging time. So it is, you know, anything that I say from here on is not to minimize the challenge that exists there. You know, which is also true for, you know, for some workplaces and for healthcare organizations as well. But when it comes to schools, this has been a place where our youth have, you know, have a place where they are living and learning and having their social and emotional development occurring, of course, as well as in the home. And so it remains a pivotally important place and a place where relationships and modeling of behaviors can make all of the difference. So, you know, again, as I mentioned, there are resources, various social emotional learning curricula, various resources that we have created along with ASCA school counselors and NASP school psychologists and the Trevor Project. I'm referring to the model school policy for suicide prevention. That is a gold standard set of documents and language that can help any school district to put into place the right things for their community that relate to prevention, along the lines of creating psychological safety in the environment, mentorship opportunities, spaces to discuss true, you know, internal experiences that youth are having. So that prevention layer, and then the intervention layer, which is about in the moment, if a student is identified as struggling, if there is a suicide attempt that has occurred either at home or at school, kind of how to approach that critical moment when students have had to be treated for mental health conditions, either ongoing as an outpatient or when they've had to take a leave of absence and they're returning back to school. Those are all key opportunities to have policies and procedures in place where the team of leadership and personnel ideally have gone over that and sort of know who's on first and who's playing which role. Those are all of the types of things, including the key moment after a suicide has occurred. That is a very important moment where we call it postvention, the period of time where actions and leadership communication can allow a community to grieve in the healthiest way possible, but also to mitigate any potential for suicide contagion by ensuring that those who are vulnerable and struggling, who could be drawn to that concept or that the images and the language around what has already occurred in a peer, either an attempt or a death, that all of that is mitigated and that those youth are identified as vulnerable, that there is outreach and that the resources are really put in front of not only the students, but of course the parents and the entire community in a consistent way that is straightforward, without stigma and without any, you know, many parents may have it in their head that there are still going to be negative repercussions if their child requires or engages in therapy, in mental health treatment. We need to promote the knowledge that mental health, like physical health, warrants the free, accessible services and the ability to access those treatments and support without any negative punitive consequences. And so we're progressing as a society along all of those lines, but schools have a very pivotal role to play. So as I mentioned, there are these key resources, such as the Model School Policy for Suicide Prevention, the After a Suicide Toolkit for Schools. If a school district has not known about those two key things, those are the premier resources for suicide prevention, and will hopefully dovetail with all of the full spectrum wellness, social, emotional learning, and mental health promoting activities, policies, and materials that are already being implemented in a school district.
Thank you, Doctor. And it's an important comment on the destigmatization of treatment care and addressing these very real issues. And this really dovetails really nicely into the next portion of our conversation, which is, we'd like to take a deeper dive into the ways that this epidemic has affected diverse groups of students in different ways. So as mentioned, sometimes the stigmatization can come paired with language barriers, with cultural barriers, with certain cultural attitudes towards receiving mental health support. So I asked the group today, who's most effective? Are inequitable educational environments contributing to this? And what is the research showing?
So I think it's a really important question, and I think we need to all take a step back and really acknowledge that students have experienced a lot. They've experienced isolation from their peers. And in addition to that, in many cases, they've lost a loved one. Their parents may have lost a job, and they've certainly lost their routines. And they've experienced something that really they've never experienced before. I'm an early childhood policy geek, I guess you would call me, by heart. And I've seen a number of programs that have really tried to help kids identify what their feelings are. And I've seen programs that have used these great big emoji pillows, because if a kid's angry, they don't really know what they're feeling something. They can't necessarily articulate what it is, but they can feel it. And so using just some very simple age appropriate, developmentally appropriate tools to help kids identify and identify what they're feeling and why, I think is a huge step, because then it facilitates a conversation. They can have a conversation with their peers, they can have a conversation with their teachers, they can have a conversation with their family. But if they don't know, they don't feel right, but they don't know what it is or how to articulate it. And I think that's something that's really important. I think one of the things our report identified is that these mental health challenges start at the very beginning of life. And we see little kids with mental health challenges that if we don't address them, they're going to get to be bigger kids with bigger mental health challenges. And so I think the notion of prevention is one that's really important. It was important before the pandemic, but it's really important now. My role here at the Department of Education is to oversee the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. And so the needs of children and adults with disabilities is our primary population of interest. And I'm sorry to report that compared to children without disabilities, children with disabilities experience higher rates of mental health challenges, more anxiety and depression, higher rates of suicide ideation and suicide attempts and non-suicidal self-injury, and greater peer victimization. What we do know is this past fall, when schools were reopening, and last year we had about 30% of schools open, and today it's really close to almost everybody. We're in the 99%, which is great. But for parents of kids with certain kinds of disabilities who are at higher risk for a really lousy outcome if they get COVID, and those are kids with Down syndrome or kids that may have underlying conditions like cystic fibrosis. And parents had a choice: do I send my kid to a school where not everyone's vaccinated and not everyone's wearing a mask, whether they're adults or their child's peers? And if they keep them home, they're really not going to have the same meaningful education experience because they're home, they're not in person. And many schools stop providing hybrid opportunities because they wanted everybody in person learning, which we at the department have applauded, but we wanted people to be in school safe and learning, and it needed to be all three. It wasn't just in-person learning being great, but kids needed to be safe. So we looked at those families with those kids that were really at higher risk, and their choices were pretty rotten. They send their kid to school for the chance that they could get really sick or possibly die, or they keep them home and all the downsides that come with home. And so I think we are looking to more opportunities. I think as you know, every time we think the pandemic's moderating, we get a new bump in the road, and we don't really know how to. All we know is that there's more uncertainty, and more uncertainty is not the place we want to be for stable emotional health. Uncertainty makes us all a little more anxious, and so I think we had hoped. I certainly had hoped, you know, at the beginning of the summer that the worst was in the rearview mirror, and now I think what we know is that we don't know when the next version or chapter of all this is happening. And our kids are still feeling that anxiety and uncertainty, and that we really need to be continuing to have this conversation about recognizing where they are, meeting them where they are, and trying to help them increase their own skill set so that they can navigate this time of great uncertainty.
Sarah, you ask a really compelling question about inequitable educational environments, and I would say, quite frankly, yes, that is contributing to a lot of this. My first school district in Nebraska, I was very fortunate to work in a magnet school that had additional budget line items that provided opportunities and access to a lot of technology that my colleagues and counterparts across the district did not have access to. And so while the majority of my EL students had access to tech in their classrooms, I got to see what it was doing for their language acquisition. The folks down the road didn't have that access. And we see that across all sorts of systems, whether that is in a rural setting where they just don't have the infrastructure to have devices in their school buildings, or possibly at home with connectivity because there's no service out there, or whatever that actually might look like. But even in more urban settings, we also know that there are inequities within access and opportunities there too. So I do think of our student groups are historically underserved and marginalized communities and populations. I think of our migrant workers, our immigrant students, all of the ones that Katie specifically helped identify in the report from the Department of Ed. And those are the folks that are most affected. And I'm grateful that she was able to articulate all of the different groups specifically, because they are the ones that we see had a lack of access to devices and home internet for emergency remote learning, that immediately felt the impact of this and were already missing essential social emotional well-being supports.
And if I can just add one more piece about what the literature and the data is showing, both about mental health outcomes as well as suicide death outcomes for various populations. What we were seeing even before the pandemic was that while white youth and actually white Americans in general saw the first decrease in the rate of suicide in 2019 by about 2.3%, the first decrease in about 20 years, which was good news. But we did not see a similar trend in the right direction for Black youth, for American Indian Alaska Native youth, or for Hispanic youth. And that same trend continued in 2020, unfortunately, again, with another overall suicide rate decline in the nation of another 3% on top of that year before, 2.3%. Now, of course, overdose deaths were up in an unprecedented fashion, and certainly some percentage of those were called overdose, accidental overdose, and were probably suicides. And that's a difficulty in the surveillance system specific to overdose and suicide. But the other thing I want to point out is that in a separate research study of Black youth, it was found that on average, Black youth experience 5 episodes of discriminatory experiences per day on average. And we know from other data that there is a phenomenon called the school to prison pipeline that when you break it down, experts believe that it has to do with whether children are in a culture or family or otherwise set up to externalize behaviors of suffering and distress or internalize them. And for Black youth, they are much more likely to be on a disciplinary pathway in the school setting when they are actually depressed or dealing with something like trauma or PTSD than a white child who is experiencing a similar mental health condition. So that type of training to become much more nuanced, to understand that trauma-informed way of developing the lens, to understand that behavior that looks aggressive or, externalizing does not always tell the full story. And in fact, there is probably every reason to believe that there is suffering and hurt, if not trauma or a mental health condition underlying those types of behaviors, and that is showing up in inequitable ways across different groups of youth. And last thing I'll say is LGBTQ youth have been known to have higher suicide risk for a long, long time. That is certainly true right now during the pandemic. And so everything we can do to create affirming, inclusive environments where all children, including those with disabilities, as Katie mentioned, every child needs to feel like they belong and that they are whole, that they are loved. And remember that when you're the one experiencing distress of any sort, like we were just hearing about, it's not only a matter of having the words to say, which is hugely important for young children, but it's the fact that there is a human instinctual response that feels shame in that moment. Mm-hmm. And so that's another barrier in the way of being able to express and articulate and help the adults around these children understand where the roots of the experience are coming from.
Important remarks. Thank you, all three of you. Some of the situations may look a little bleak, but there are many solutions, as mentioned by all of you, and actionable steps we can take to improve this epidemic. As mentioned in the beginning of the panel, the leadership group's report on mental health is solutions oriented, much like the federal report is around actionable. We wanted to learn more about the good work educators and other stakeholders are doing to address this challenge and highlight it to provide a model for others. We know that the Biden administration took the same approach. Katie, as you close out, beginning with you, what did your research uncover about the ways schools and other stakeholders are addressing this challenge? Are there best practices you can highlight for our members?
Absolutely. So our report identified 7 challenges and made 7 recommendations. And I think we have appropriately addressed the challenges, but I want to highlight quickly the recommendations. And the first one is to prioritize wellness for each and every child, student, educator, and provider. And I think we can't underestimate that while we've got children that have significant mental health needs, the adults in the building do as well. And that it's the old airplane, put your mask on first before you help the person next to you. We really have to make sure that the adults in the building are okay as well, and that they are supported as they try to support our children. 2, to enhance mental health literacy and reduce stigma and other barriers to access. 3, implement continuum of evidence-based prevention practices. 4, establish an integrated framework of educational, social, emotional, and behavioral health supports for all. 5, leverage policy and funding. 6, enhance workforce capacity. And 7, use data and decision-making to promote equitable implementation and outcomes. And just quickly, I'll give you a couple examples of where we've seen schools really take a leadership role. The Baltimore City Public Schools built upon its existing social and emotional learning efforts at the district and developed social and emotional learning lesson plans and weekly themes around compassion, connection, and courage. New York City Public Schools, the largest school district in the nation, is hiring 500 additional social workers and more school psychologists and family support staff. And finally, states like Minnesota are using American Rescue Plan funds to hire more licensed school social workers, nurses, and psychologists. We know we have workforce shortages across the country, and we're hoping that schools and districts can really look to the additional resources that have come this year from the Department of Education to really be able to bring in those critical experts in to work with the existing staff to help them build out these policies and programs so that everyone in the building gets the support that they need.
Thank you. Much to celebrate on that front. It seems that we have come to time, but we'd like to close out this panel with just one question, and this is to the educators, leaders across the corporate, nonprofit, and government space. What should each sector be doing to address this challenge, and what is the call to action? Again, thank you to our esteemed panelists, Dr. Christine Luce, Katie Neese, and Christina Ishmael from the Department of Education. It's been a pleasure engaging in this conversation, and let's continue that as we address that very important call to action. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Coming up next at the Higher Learning Summit presented by Blue Shield of California, Chair of the California Board of Regents, Cecilia Estelano, with closing remarks, talking about some recent major moves at the state level.
Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. As we strive for an equitable pandemic recovery, it's crucial that we work to expand access to higher education and lifelong learning to enhance our economic vitality, grow our leadership in innovation and entrepreneurship, and address the climate crisis. And we need to do all of that while addressing deep economic and racial disparities. So I want to talk to you today about the University of California's plans to deliver the benefits of a UC education to more Californians. But UC is just part of a larger ecosystem that also includes K through 12, community colleges, CSUs, private institutions, and our industry partners. So I want to talk also about how we all must play a role in reknitting together all parts of the Golden State through higher education, upskilling, and continuous learning. So let me focus my comments on how we can work together in more collaborative, climate-friendly, and equity-focused ways to meet the needs of our state, our nation, and our world. So it's always good to ground these lofty talks in some numbers, and I'm going to use the numbers that a lot of folks use whenever we have these conversations about higher education, and that is the Public Policy Institute of California's projection that we will be 1.1 million college students short by 2030 if we don't seriously change course in California about how we approach higher education. PPIC released a pivotal report with this number, 1.1 million, back in 2015, and they had some general recommendations on how to address this, what they call the workforce skills gap. The good news is since that report, we've made important policy and process changes and investments to increase access to college, improve completion and time to degree, expand transfer degrees, and we even have made a run at being smarter about the way we do financial aid. So that's great. And now we have more students completing A through G requirements. We have more students applying for and attending UC than ever before. In fact, interest has grown so much that since we eliminated the use of the SAT a couple of years ago in admissions, that's essentially crashed our admissions portal 2 years running. That's actually a good thing. And I have some recent data. As of midnight last night, Apply UC received a record-breaking 248,653 application submissions for the fall 2022 application cycle. This is just record-breaking numbers. So there's no shortage of interest in the benefits of the University of California education. Well, UC enrollment has grown by almost 55,000 students since 2011, over the last decade, with over 45,000 undergraduates, and 9,500 graduate students. CSU enrollment has grown over that same period by about 59,000 students, with 65,000 undergraduates, but a decline of 6,100 graduate students. So we're making progress, but it's not enough. It's not fast enough, and it's not reaching all the corners of this vast and exceedingly diverse state. That's why we at the UC Board of Regents have been pressing for a plan to expand. And President Drake and the chancellors of our campuses have responded. They formed a working group to map out how we can increase enrollment by 20,000 students by 2030. That's the equivalent of adding another UC Santa Cruz to the state without going through time and massive expense of building another campus. So that's great, but I think that we can and must do more. UC should be accessible to more people from every corner of the state and every socioeconomic circumstance. We must do this while maintaining academic excellence and ensuring quality instruction, guidance, and support for our students. But UC is not an island. We can't and shouldn't do this alone. We have to work with our sister segments to broadly increase access to higher education and continuous learning. Together, we can build on what we've learned about remote instruction and online learning during the pandemic to allow for more flexible scheduling of courses and appropriate use of online instruction. We can incorporate strategies to use existing facilities more efficiently, like better using facilities for summer sessions. We can expand and facilitate dual enrollment to enable students to graduate more quickly. And we should explore strategies for using and sharing facilities among the sister segments with the CSUs and the community colleges. We should also explore the potential of acquiring facilities and campuses or partnering with private higher education institutions and other institutions to make use of their facilities. We have a great example of this in UC Berkeley's bid to create a campus at Moffett Field to lead the world in aerospace and urban air mobility. UC Santa Cruz provides another great example of expanding access to UC off-campus through its UCSC Silicon Valley Center. This is a host of an extension program and a multidisciplinary teaching and research hub. It's home to a master's degree program in games and playable media, a high demand program in this region. So we should explore creating education hubs in remote portions of the state that use existing community colleges. Why not think about acquiring a dead or dying regional shopping center and make a joint UC, Cal State, CCC hub the anchor for its revival? We could have students, staff, and faculty housing on site. We could convert acres of surface parking lots into green zones of trees, housing, and recreation centers. We can do this in a climate smart way that revitalizes communities and truly drives an equitable recovery. So as we move on to these efforts, we have to ensure that our plan to expand is thoughtful and comprehensive. We need to grow the ranks of our faculty to meet the educational demands of increased enrollment. We also have to expand graduate student enrollment while we expand enrollment generally, because graduate students are the pipeline for the professoriate, not only for the University of California, but for Cal State, community colleges, and private higher education institutions up and down the state and nationally. We also have to make sure we grow the ranks of our staff to ensure we provide a quality student experience and deliver administrative efficiency to our enterprise. So this takes me to my last point. What can our industry partners in the Zoom room do to help us produce the educated, highly skilled, nimble, adaptive workforce that you need to power our economy? Here are 3 things. First, participate in the $250 million K-16 regional collaboratives that are called for in this year's budget. This program will award grants to between 5 and 8 regional collaboratives to align higher education with workforce needs. The focus of this program is on mapping regional workforce needs and streamlining occupational pathways that lead to high-paying, in-demand jobs. The second thing that industry partners can do is help to anchor the Community Economic Resiliency Fund planning efforts in your region. There's about $600 million set aside in this year's state budget for planning, pilot, and implementation grants to promote a sustainable and equitable recovery through what we're calling the SURF program, again, Community Economic Resiliency Fund. It calls for regional collaboratives with labor, business, community, government, education, economic development, and other key stakeholders. We need your voice at the table to guide and inform these efforts. And lastly, we need your help to support and build more student housing. Actually, everybody in the Zoom room, all of us, need to support efforts generally to build affordable and workforce housing. This is one of the greatest pinch points for all of us who care about educating and keeping the best and brightest in the Golden State. So let me close by noting that the governor and the legislature are on board with the need to double down on California's education advantage. They have allocated record sums to our segments of higher education in this stupendous budget year. But we all know these good times won't last forever. So let's work together to make sure that we lock in the kinds of partnerships around shared facilities, joint and streamlined degrees and certificate programs, and collaborative planning that will serve us well when money is tight. And with that, again, I thank you for your time, and let there be light.
At San Jose State, we have a lot to be proud of.
We advance creativity and innovation.
We explore interdisciplinary research to study wildfire.
We reflect our diverse community and are continually working towards equity and inclusion.
We strive for justice to advance the public good.
We promote success in and out of the classroom.
We contribute $4.1 billion to California's economy.
We are transformation defined. We are Spartan.
Thank you for watching the Silicon Valley Leadership Group Higher Learning Summit for Workforce and Education. We'd like to take one last time to thank our amazing sponsors for all of their support. We'd like to thank our thought leader sponsor for the event, Blue Shield of California. We would also like to thank our innovator sponsors, Genentech and the San Francisco 49ers. We would like to thank our accelerator sponsors, IBM, KLA, and the Santa Clara County Office of Education. We would like to thank our incubator sponsors, Applied Materials, Microsoft, Stanford University, and University of Phoenix. We would like to thank our media sponsors, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Bay Area News Group, Mercury News. And we would also like to thank our amazing production partner and sponsor, Zoom. Thank you for your support.
After working in the industry for a couple years, I realized that I still needed that experience of working on a manufacturing shop floor. So I never ran machines before. I didn't know a lot of the terminology. It was very difficult to do my job well without having that background knowledge. You know, I Google searched manufacturing programs in the area, came across De Anza, and then decided to start taking classes here. And they offer programs like SolidWorks and Mastercam, which are heavily used in the industry. So, you know, thinking ahead, I figured I'd put myself in a place that could give me the tools I need in order to be successful in my career. It's pretty great to be a female in this industry just because, you know, there's so few of us. So, and when you do get someone that is female, it's like you kind of just like work together and you band together. You know, there's a lot of people who take classes here that work in various parts of manufacturing, so it's a really great place to network. So you meet people that are potentially at companies that you might want to work in someday, or you know, you hear about careers that they have that you didn't know existed before. It's like, oh, you do that? That's so cool. Like that's maybe something I want to do. And I'm studying for a certificate as a CNC research and development machinist. And I highly recommend it to anyone that's looking to get into manufacturing. Come to De Anza. It's a great place.
When our world turned upside down,
we got to work.
Innovating ways to combat the pandemic.
Adapting to a new virtual reality.
Treating the sick.
And serving our community.
As we enter a changed world,
we're working harder than ever
to accelerate the impact of our research,
to inspire creativity that enlightens the human experience,
to apply knowledge to social challenges,
to improve the world for everyone.
Thank you, Chair Estolano. We appreciate your creative vision for rethinking the ways colleges, universities, and companies can partner to prepare more students for innovation economy careers. Hello again, I'm Sarah Garcia, Director of Education and Workforce Development here at the Leadership Group. We are so proud of the great content delivered today, and we hope you found it worthwhile. On behalf of SVLG and our thought leader sponsor, Blue Shield of California, we'd like to thank everyone who contributed to today's program. Our amazing panelists, our special guests, our sponsors, and of course, Zoom, who handled the production infrastructure that brought today's content. We also want to take a moment to thank our elected representatives, as well as our state and federal officials who joined us today. And thank you too to our education leaders and business executives who joined our virtual audience this morning. You can watch the entire summit rebroadcast on Monday at svlg.org/watch. SVLG still has more great events in 2021, including the Young Women's Leadership Forum, STEM for the Stars on December 6th, 7th, and 8th. Our Police Accountability and in Communities Roundtable on December 14th, and our Women Executive Roundtable series will close out this season with Assembly Member Akilah Weber on December 21st. If you'd like to learn more about any of these events or are interested in sponsorship, contact events@svlg.org. So from all of us at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, thank you, and we'll see you next time.